Live, not from New York. It's the Get Clear Show. And now, here's Laura.
Hello and welcome to the Get Clear Show. I'm Laura and I'm your host. What a fantastic and exciting show we have for you today. I have the privilege of getting to sit with Dr. John Eplee, who also served some time as our state representative, and we're going to talk to him today about some of those experiences that he had and what's going on in the state of Kansas. Welcome to the show, Dr. Eplee. Before we get started, I do have a little bit of housekeeping, something I have to talk about. So I'd like to share with everybody this website. If you'll go to www.followlaura.com, you're going to find out about some great stuff that's happening. You'll get some information on Clarity Life Coaching Services, and I want to talk to you for just a moment about that. Right now, if you will mention this interview with Dr. Eplee, you're going to get one free life coaching session. And so that's great. You think that's a great deal, Dr. Eplee? You can get coached in either business.
Good deal. Yeah.
In business or in personal life. So just go ahead and go to www.followlaura.com. Welcome to the show, Dr. Eplee. I'm excited that you're here.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit today about you. It isn't very often that we meet somebody who goes from a medical career and then into politics. And I know recently you took a little break from your medical profession and you represented us at the state. And I want to talk to you about that. Tell me a little about yourself and how you came to do that.
Yes, I did. That was a kind of a long time coming, but I come from a family of political engagement and involvement. My grandfather served on the Grange. He was an elected official many years ago. My father was a county commissioner for 8 years in southeast Kansas, in Wilson County. And so I sort of come by this naturally. And then my journey started 10 or 12 years ago when I was involved with my local recreation commission, serving there. And then I became involved, it evolved into the school board, which I've been on for about 8 years. And that's what really galvanized me to then finally run for state representative when the position became open and available. And I was at a point in my career where I was looking for a pivot or a change, and it was a good opportunity that I took, and I ran hard and was fortunate enough to get elected and represent you and Doniphan County and most of Atchison County in Topeka this past year, and I've got one more year, and then it's election time again.
And you're back to your office. You're back to practicing medicine, aren't you?
Yes, the session ran longer than we thought, no surprise. And but I got back to the office mid-June, and I've been here ever since, with a couple of weekends off. But it's been good to get back in the office and visit with my patients and see them again.
Yeah. Did you miss them?
You know, I did. I've always enjoyed visiting with folks and seeing them in the office and trying to help them with their health issues and so to speak, move the cheese for them as we deal with a wide array of issues that we see in family medicine.
There have been some changes in medicine, haven't there?
Oh, yes. What we're doing right here, I mean, the computerizing records has probably been one of the biggest things that I've lived through. And family medicine is so all-encompassing of so many different areas of medicine, which I've been, front row center for, that it's interesting to see how the computer is engaged with the wide array of services that family docs provide throughout the state of Kansas.
Yeah, it's just modern technology. We had a little bit of a glitch earlier with our technology, and I was saying I love it when it works, right? It's sort of a love-hate relationship. Sometimes I wish that we just went back to filing things the old-fashioned way, because those don't crash. But then we have to worry about things getting flooded or burned, and so it's nice to have that computerized backup.
I'm sure that all physicians can comment about this, but there's been an amazing just evolution in my time, from flip cards of charts to full robust paper charts, and then to integrating all that. And I mean, that's a lot of paperwork into digital technology. And now it's all digital, and I mean that's the way it will be from now on. And as long as it works, we're good. But when it doesn't work, it's pretty problematic for us.
Yes, it is. It really can be. So do you keep backup copies, paper copies of things, or is it just all digital?
It's all digital. There's no paper anymore. There are backups of the digital technology in other silos, but not no paper.
No more paper. Isn't that something? That's just amazing to me. Well,
It's amazing
and I
to
wanted
me.
to ask you something else. You mentioned that you've delivered how many babies? How many babies do you think you've delivered?
So I've delivered over 1,500 babies. When I started family medicine, it was common and still is part of the curriculum for FPs in rural Kansas and rural areas of the United States to perform OB services. And it was a wonderful part of my career. I decided about 8 or 9 years ago I needed to get more sleep at night, which I think was good. And after 1,500 deliveries and doing my term for motherhood, I thought it was okay to give that up. And I've kind of matured with my practice since then. But so I don't do as much pediatrics in OB. I still do some, but I don't deliver babies any longer. So
yeah, getting woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning must not have been very fun for you repeatedly, right?
It was okay when you're younger and you can seemingly recover from that and handle it. But as you get older, I just find I function a lot better when I get enough sleep.
Everybody does, right?
Yeah,
well,
I think
would
that's
like to talk to you. I had the privilege of getting to hear you speak at a function, a group you and I belong to, and you did such a wonderful job of explaining to us what you had participated in and how you had represented us at the state. And one of the things that you talked about was education, and you talked about school finance. And I thought, that's really, at least for me, I have a daughter who's a teacher, and a lot of family members who are involved in education. And so I think that's been on the mind of Kansans for the last several years, and we're very concerned about school finance. And you got to talk to us about that. I would like for you to share with our audience today a little about what that process looked like, what happened, what the discussion was about. Would you mind sharing that?
Sure, I'd like to give you some background information. This was an issue that we knew was coming up. We knew the Supreme Court had ruled that block grant funding was not constitutional. And so the House early on, at the beginning of session, set up a special school finance committee that specifically looked at the old formula, looked at new methods, and took a very integrated approach to try to come up with a new funding formula in the state of Kansas. I mean, gosh, it involves 52 to 54% of our entire state general fund. So it's over half of our state general fund. So we had to do it right. And to the speaker's credit, Speaker Reitman, he put this committee together, and they started meeting from day one and met for 4 months. And it was a lot of the thought leaders and experts in the field of education. Unfortunately, many of those people had been elected in this last cycle of elections, and they really lended a great oversight to this bill as it evolved and went forward. And what's ironic and interesting is, at the end of the day, after all of this study, and I mean they studied every school funding formula in all 50 states and looked at all kinds of methods, make building-based method versus student-based method, they did settle on a student-based funding as we did in 1992 with many changes in the formula. So it was a revision, a major revision, if you will, of the school funding formula that was enacted in 1992.
And how many days did it take for you to finally come to a conclusion on all of this? There was a lot of work that went into that, wasn't there?
Well, the whole session tied for the longest session ever with 114 days. But as far as how long for education, that happened about 10 or 12 days before we got done. But it took a long time. And there was, I think this set a world record, at least in Kansas, for the number of amendments that were considered and analyzed to change the bill. And some of those things were put in, some of those weren't. There was a piece put in for school choice, which was somewhat of a compromise to allow the bill to go forward. And there was portions about school bonding and interest on new facilities that was also a compromise. And there were many other issues, but all in all, I know in committee there were over 80 amendments, I think close to 90 amendments they considered. And then on the floor, there was another 15 to 20 on the House floor. And as it turned out, when this went to conference committee, it came back from the Senate. The Senate got to author it as Senate Bill 19, but I'm going to say this for the record. I think the lion's share of the work was done in the House.
So many people, probably myself included, we were so removed from that process. We put people in positions such as yourself to take care of that for us. But can you explain to us a little about the process, maybe from start to finish, and how a bill goes through and what that looks like?
So I'll do my best. So we had a special Education Finance Committee that met. It had, I think 16 members plus a chairman. These people didn't get there by accident. Many of them, I think there were 3 or 4 previous superintendents, several teachers, folks that had been very involved with education in the past that understood the school funding formula. It is, even now as I sit here, it's a complicated formula. It involves approximately 16 to 17 variables. They have the different weightings, and this is what changed was how we looked at these weightings, and this is what they took each weighting and analyzed it, discussed it, decided how it should look in the final formula. And again, with that came a lot of amendments, and so they meet not every day, but almost every day, and they consider this information. They get reams of paperwork and digital material that they consider. They process it, and then finally, at some point, they have to come up with a vote. And I want to say it was right before veto session, they voted on the bill, and they did decide to pass it out to the floor for further discussion and processing. Then it becomes kind of a political football between the Speaker and the President of the Senate to decide how this will proceed, whether it'll go to our body or go to the Senate first. In this case, the Senate also had been meeting concurrently, but not as often. And they took it up first, passed it over to us, and then and that's how it became authored as a Senate bill. We made some revisions. It went back to conference committee. Which is a conference committee, is then a combined about 6 or 7 folks, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, and they reevaluate the bill and make more subtle tweaks and changes. And then it finally comes back to both chambers for passage. And we, as I recall, got the bill first. We passed it first. And I don't have the exact, I do in my newsletter, but it passed with a majority, and then it went to the Senate and passed there also, and then went to the governor's desk. And, so there are many, many steps, as I think I outlined, and the governor did choose to sign it, and it will become law now. So
I don't think we as citizens realize how much work goes into each one of these things that you deal with. What were some of the other bills that you had an opportunity to be a part of sponsoring, and tell us about those?
Well, and I appreciate that. Before I get to the ones I sponsored, real briefly, there's 3 other things I want to briefly touch on, like in my newsletter. In addition to education, we certainly talked about taxes, because with this education piece, there was a funding amount attached to it of about $460 million. And we have to figure out where that money comes from. And so with that then followed a tax bill that was heatedly discussed in both chambers, and it was delayed and delayed and delayed, and finally came to final action in the House and was passed in the House, passed in the Senate, and it was a tax increase. This was a long process I won't go into today, but it did involve raising income tax, putting back the non-wage income deduction on businesses, and putting back some deductions and other components of tax. And it came back to us for passage, and we passed it. The Senate passed it, as I said. And then after the governor's veto, we had to pass it by a veto-proof majority, which is 84. And it did pass the House on veto override by 88 votes, and we need 84. And then the Senate passed it just by enough. I want to say 27 votes, and then it becomes law over the governor's veto, which was a real pivotal moment in our state, because up to this point, our legislature had been in lockstep, I'd say, with the governor on tax policy, and this was a departure from that. And I think I saw it coming, and I think many others, that were in my position in the House and Senate saw it coming also. And and while I have great respect for Governor Brownback and many of the things he's done, this was time to pivot and take a change in direction. And I feel like your representatives and your senators are more connected to the people and maybe have a better pulse on that. And so while it is a tax restoration from 2012 when they cut income taxes so much, it was just, I think, it became necessary. And when it was obvious that the governor would not sign off on any tax increases, even House leadership and Senate, many of the Senate leaders agreed with us, and that's why they got on board, because prior to that, they'd been holding back. So we passed tax, and then shortly thereafter, we passed a budget, which was easier because we had enough funding to do some things that needed to get done that hadn't been done as they relate to mental hospitals, to CAPERS funding, to KDOT bonding, and things of that nature that we had not been able to do previously in the last 6 years, actually taking from those funds. And so it was a big pivot. And then from there was one more bill I'll mention, and that was the gun bill, which I'm not super proud about, but I think it was necessary to continue the exemption of mental health facilities in our state, the KU Medical Center, and publicly funded hospitals and nursing homes, to allow them to have an exemption to not allow concealed carry in their facilities. You know, as a physician, I've worked in those conditions my whole career, and I understand why physicians and staff don't want to allow concealed carry in those environments. And so I was supportive of that also. So at the very end, the last week, we got a lot done, but it was a lot of delay until we finally got everything accomplished.
Lots of work, lots of work.
In my own realm, one thing you mentioned, there was a House bill that I was involved with, that I was passionate about, and it was House Bill 2030 that was involving immunizations, allowing pharmacists to give adolescent vaccinations down to age 12, and also requiring that all providers utilize the what's called WebIZ to register immunizations, so we know who has what vaccines, and we can all readily access that throughout the state. It was a very important bill for me, and I think for medicine.
So was that one that you had the opportunity to sponsor then?
Yes, I was not the direct sponsor, but I was if you will, the vanguard that helped get it through the House. And there were several other things we passed through Health and Human Services about opioids, about allowing how we take care of people that have overdosed on opioids. And I think we're making progress in that regard, too.
Yeah, that really does seem to be a problem, doesn't it? That's something that needs to be addressed.
It's a huge problem, and we'll address it again in the next session. It's going to be a contentious issue because a lot of my fellow physicians aren't very receptive towards seeing restrictions placed on us as they relate to opioid pain medications.
I imagine that's going to be put you in sort of a vicarious situation, because you want to get along with your coworkers, but at the same time you want to take care of the public.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. I don't know if there'll be too many restrictions placed, but I think it's going to be something that folks are going to bring up for us to look at.
So when is the next session?
Well, it starts the second Monday of January 2018, and we've got a lot to look forward to. I think by then we'll have a better feel on how we're doing income-wise with the new tax bill as it came out, and how we met our commitments on the budget. I've already heard some pushback. In the budget, we provided pay raises for some employees, and there were some loopholes and some people that fell out and didn't get a pay raise. And so I think we're going to have to look at that. I think that, again, like I said, I think the opioid crisis will continue to evaluate. I think that medical marijuana is going to come up again, and I think it should. I think we need to process that and look at that a little bit more. I believe that we may look at sales tax reductions on food. We've talked a lot about that. I think now if we're in a better place as a state, I think it's time to look at that. I want to say our tax on food is close to 7% in most counties, and I think my goal would be to see us get that reduced to 5% or less right away, and eventually, like many states, maybe have no sales tax on food and essential services for Kansans.
Well, certainly you have a lot to look forward to, and a lot is going to happen, I think, in January. And I want to thank you personally for your service and how you are representing us and taking care of us at that level. Not too many people would put themselves out there to do that. And you had talked about, when I heard you speak, you talked about somebody else who, you said, if you don't think this is a stressful thing to go through, can you tell us somebody, Patsy Terrell?
Yes, Representative Patsy Terrell, and God rest her soul. She was a Democrat representative from Hutch, and she had worked hard. We worked, side by side across the aisle on certain issues, and we didn't always agree on everything, but we did on some things. And it was, I think, the morning after we had lengthy discussion and heated discussion about overriding the governor on this tax issue. And we did vote to override the governor again, as I said. And the next morning, I think she was pretty celebratory that night. And she was always a night person, as I understood anyway. But I saw her briefly at one of the local establishments and said hi to her, and she was fine. And she was fine the next morning. She sent out a tweet about she thought that the sun really was rising in a good way in Kansas, and she was happy about what we'd accomplished from her perspective as with her district. And then later that morning, she abruptly passed away. She died. And so that's not the first time that's happened, but it might be the first time after a historic vote like that. I'm not sure. But there were many flowers adorning her desk in the House. And she was the first person I met at a mixer when we started about a year ago. And so I felt close to Patsy, and I miss her, and she's going to be very hard to replace.
And our condolences to her family and to those who knew her. But again, I want to thank you for your service to us and how you're taking care of us. One more thing before we get going here. Tell us just a little bit more about yourself, and out of this experience, what have you appreciated or enjoyed the most?
Well, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to learn a lot more. Physicians are notorious for being a little maybe presumptuous about their education background and knowing everything. But I learned that I don't know a lot about business, economy, political science, and I learned a lot. And you learn as a first-year legislator to listen carefully and keep your ears open and learn from some of your veteran and senior legislators. It was a great opportunity for me. I'm so appreciative that the voters had the confidence in me to give me this opportunity. And I really want to honor that by trying to represent my district in a way that I think represents their needs and concerns. I did send out a survey early on in the session, and a lot of my votes were founded upon the responses from my voters. And so I tried really hard to represent my voters, and I'm going to continue to do that. And I hate that we have to run for election every 2 years, but it's coming up again in 2018. So, it'll be here before we know it. And I at this point in time, it was a fascinating enough experience for me. I'm planning on going forward. I think this next session will be a lot shorter. It'll be a lot more efficient. It's an election year. I think we'll stay away from highly contentious issues. We dealt with a very robust schedule that we won't, I think, ever maybe deal with so much in a session again. So not that it's going to be easy street, but it's going to be easier, and I think that's good.
Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing with us. And I'm just excited to see what happens when you go back into session, and there seems like things have really progressed and you've made some good strides, and again, thank you for that. Thank you for being on today's show, and I look forward to hearing from our audience. I'm sure they're going to have some questions for you. If they do have questions, is there some place they can get a hold of you or email you? Is there a way that people can contact you?
Yes, so I have 2 emails that are fine to contact me through, and I'm always online on either one of these. So lowercase john.eplee@house.kansas.gov, or my business email. And I think my business would prefer you use my legislative one. That's the one I just gave you. But my business email is jeplee, lowercase, atchhosp.org if they have questions or want to reach out to me. And Laura, just so you know this, if and when the opportunity presents itself for another interview or for follow-up, I'd be happy to come back on the show and maybe you could have some prepared questions that we could take and from the constituents. I think that would be a positive thing for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important to keep the public informed of what's going on. Sometimes we vote for people and they do whatever, and then we don't think about it anymore. But we have a tendency to maybe complain more than we should because we don't understand what the process is or what they've had to go through to try to get things taken care of for us. So I certainly appreciate you giving this information out to the public and wanting to keep us informed and a part of. So definitely we'll have to have you back on maybe after January and we find out, what other progress has been made. I think that would be a good thing.
We have a long ways to go, but we've got a good start with this last session. So.
I think so. So I think in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get going and let everybody get back to their day. But I certainly appreciate you being on here. You've been watching the Get Clear show, and today we had the opportunity to listen to Dr. John Eplee talk to us about some of the wonderful things that are taking place in Kansas. Again, thank you for being on the show. And to all of you, as always, have a great day.
Thank you.